In the cold silence of a forgotten street, a homeless veteran stood beneath the flickering light of a broken lamppost, clutching the last remnants of a life once defined by honor. His jacket was torn, his medals long gone, but the weight of his service still echoed in every scar on his face. That night, he didn't ask for pity, only dignity. Yet, when a corrupt cop stopped his patrol car and decided to make an example out of him, that fragile dignity was crushed under the heel of arrogance. What the officer didn't know was that someone was watching. And soon, justice would roar, not from a courthouse, but from the engines of men who live by their own code. The city had forgotten its heroes. The ones who fought for freedom were now fighting for survival. But in that moment of humiliation, when the officer's laughter echoed down the alley, destiny began to turn its wheels. A single act of cruelty can awaken something powerful, something raw. The sound of distant motorcycles cut through the night like thunder before a storm, a warning that not all debts are paid in money. Some are paid in respect. As the corrupt cop mocked the old veteran, headlights broke through the darkness. One by one, the bikes arrived, chrome glinting, engines rumbling like growling beasts ready to strike. These weren't just men in leather. They were guardians of the forgotten, the kind who didn't need badges to know what was right. The air thickened with tension as the officer's smirk faltered, replaced by the cold realization that he had crossed a line that should never be crossed. The leader of the bikers dismounted, his boots echoing against the pavement as he walked toward the trembling officer. He didn't need to raise his voice. The silence carried his authority. Behind him stood brothers bound by loyalty, not law. The veteran, still sitting on the curb, watched as justice, real justice, finally found its way to him. The tables had turned, and this time, the powerful would learn what it meant to kneel. That night would be remembered not for violence, but for something deeper: redemption through fear, respect through humility, and the unbreakable bond between those society had cast aside. Because sometimes, it takes the roar of engines and the courage of outlaws to remind the world that true honor never dies. It just waits for the right moment to rise again. The veteran's hands trembled as he tried to gather the few coins that had fallen to the ground. The officer's laughter still echoed in his ears, a sharp, cold sound that reminded him how small he had become in a world he once defended. He could still remember the battlefield, the sand, the smoke, the cries of brothers who never made it home. Back then, he was called a hero. Now he was just another invisible man sleeping on the sidewalk. The sting of the officer's words hurt more than any wound he'd ever carried from war. But as the sound of approaching engines grew louder, something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, he felt seen. The bikers arrived like a storm from the past, gritty, loud, and unapologetically alive. Their leader, a tall man with gray in his beard and fire in his eyes, stepped forward. His name was Cole, a veteran himself, one who had traded the battlefield for the open road, but had never forgotten the code: respect those who've bled for your freedom. Cole's gaze fell on the old man, sitting on the curb. Without a word, he removed his gloves, knelt beside him, and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You served," he said quietly. "You don't kneel to anyone." Those words, simple and steady, broke through years of silence. The veteran's eyes filled with tears, not of weakness, but of recognition. The officer tried to hide his unease behind arrogance. "Step back," he barked, placing his hand near his holster. But the bikers didn't move. Cole turned his head slowly, his voice calm, yet sharp as steel. "You think a badge makes you a man?" he asked. The street grew still. The officer's confidence cracked beneath the weight of eyes that had seen real combat. Men who'd buried brothers and carried guilt heavier than any law could judge. In that moment, it wasn't about power. It was about respect, and the officer had none left to give. Behind a circle of bikes, a few locals began to gather, drawn by the rumble and the tension. Phones recorded. Whispers spread. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid the homeless man now watched in silence, their shame reflected in the glow of their screens. The officer's authority was shrinking with every heartbeat. He could feel it. His voice wavered when he tried to speak again, but the words refused to come. Cole simply crossed his arms and waited, giving him the silence he deserved. And then it happened, the moment that would burn itself into everyone's memory. Cole pointed to the veteran and said, "He fought for this flag you hide behind. The least you can do is apologize." The officer's jaw tightened, his pride wrestling with fear. But when he saw the determination in the bikers' faces, he understood there was only one way out. With trembling hands, he knelt on the cracked pavement. His voice, once cruel and loud, now barely a whisper, "I'm sorry." The crowd gasped. The veteran looked away, tears falling onto the asphalt. Justice, raw and unscripted, had finally found its way back to him. Cole didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, as if restoring balance to the world was a burden he'd carried too many times before. "Now get up," he said to the officer, "and learn what it means to serve." His tone wasn't vengeful. It was measured, almost fatherly. The biker code wasn't about chaos. It was about honor, loyalty, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The officer stood slowly, his eyes avoiding the veterans. For the first time, he looked small, stripped of the uniform that had once made him untouchable. That moment was more than punishment. It was a lesson carved in humility. The veteran remained silent, unsure whether to feel gratitude or disbelief. He had spent years fading into the shadows, invisible to a city that had once cheered him home. Yet here he was, surrounded by men who still lived by an unspoken promise. No brother left behind. Cole offered his hand, and the veteran hesitated before taking it. The strength in that handshake carried something sacred, recognition between warriors, even from different wars. "Come with us," Cole said. "No man who's worn the uniform sleeps on the street." Those words carried warmth deeper than charity. They carried belonging. The bikers helped the old man to his feet. One of them, a younger rider named Tank, took off his leather jacket and placed it around the veteran's shoulders. It was worn, heavy, smelling of oil and rain, but it felt like armor. "You're one of us now," Tank said with a grin. The veteran smiled faintly, the first real smile in years. Around them, the crowd began to applaud, though quietly, unsure if they were witnessing justice or redemption. For the veteran, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he wasn't invisible anymore. As they prepared to leave, the officer stood by his car, watching in silence. His world had shifted in a single night. Power had turned to shame, authority to reflection. Cole walked past him, stopping for a moment. "You still have a chance to be a good man," he said. "Use it." The words struck like thunder, firm but forgiving. Then the roar of engines returned, echoing through the streets as the bikers escorted the veteran away. Each motorcycle's growl felt like a heartbeat, pulsing with life, loyalty, and purpose. That night, the city's cold corners seemed to warm a little. The old man, sitting at the back of the lead bike, felt the wind against his face and the rush of freedom once more. It wasn't the kind of freedom written in laws or speeches. It was the freedom that comes from being seen, respected, and defended. For the first time in years, he didn't feel forgotten. He belonged to something again. The road stretched ahead, endless and alive, as the sound of justice faded into the night. The next morning, the sun rose over the city like a quiet apology, casting soft light on streets that had witnessed something unforgettable. News of the incident spread faster than wildfire. Clips of the officer kneeling before the homeless veteran flooded social media, drawing millions of views in just a few hours. People debated, argued, and cried in the comment sections, but one thing was certain: the veteran's story had touched a nerve the world could no longer ignore. Reporters gathered outside the precinct, demanding answers. The department issued a statement, calling the act unacceptable behavior, but the truth ran deeper than any press release could capture. Cole and his crew watched the coverage from a small roadside diner outside town. The veteran sat among them, still overwhelmed by the attention. He wasn't used to being noticed, let alone praised. A waitress poured him a cup of coffee, smiling softly when she recognized him from the viral video. "You're a hero," she said, placing a hand over her heart. The veteran lowered his eyes. "I was," he murmured, "a long time ago." Cole leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Once a hero," he said, "always a hero. The world just forgets too easily." His words carried the weight of truth, the kind that silences a room. The bikers weren't men of speeches or politics. They didn't crave headlines or applause. They acted when others turned away. For them, what happened wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. In their world, respect wasn't demanded. It was earned. They rode for justice that couldn't be bought, for the kind that lived between the cracks of a broken system. As they ate in silence, each man knew they had done something more than confront a bully. They had reminded the city of a forgotten truth, that courage wears many faces, and not all heroes wear medals. After breakfast, Cole offered the veteran a ride back into town, but the old man hesitated. "I've got nowhere to go," he said quietly. Cole's brow furrowed. "Then you ride with us." It wasn't an invitation. It was a declaration. The veteran's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were warm. He nodded slowly. "I never thought I'd have a brotherhood again," he said. Cole smiled faintly. "You never lost it," he replied. "You just had to find it in a different uniform." The engines roared to life once more, and the diner windows rattled as they rode off into the open highway. The road stretched before them, endless and free, carrying echoes of laughter and redemption. The veteran sat tall this time, wind whipping through his gray hair as memories of the battlefield melted into the hum of the bikes. He didn't feel like a broken man anymore. He felt alive, and somewhere deep in his heart, he knew this was just the beginning of something larger than himself. A second chance not just to live, but to remind the world that even those forgotten by society still have a story worth hearing. Days turned into weeks, and the veteran's story continued to ripple through the nation. Veterans organizations reached out, donations poured in, and strangers from every corner of the country sent letters of gratitude. But amidst the attention, the biker brotherhood stayed grounded. They didn't see themselves as saviors, only men who refused to let injustice go unanswered. Cole and his crew became symbols of something rare, raw humanity wrapped in steel and leather. They weren't perfect, but they were real, and that authenticity drew people in like moths to a flame. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Cole found the veteran sitting by the fire outside the biker compound. He stared into the flames, lost in thought. "You ever think about going back?" Cole asked. The veteran took a deep breath. "Back to what?" he said softly. "There's nothing left for me there." Cole nodded. "Then maybe it's time to build something new." He tossed a small piece of wood into the fire. The sparks flew upward, tiny embers of hope. "You can't change what happened," Cole continued, "but you can choose what happens next." That night, surrounded by men who had fought their own silent wars, the veteran found a new sense of purpose. He began helping at local shelters, talking to other veterans who had fallen through the cracks. His story gave them courage, the kind born not from triumph, but from survival. People listened because his pain was real, and his redemption even more so. Every time he spoke, he reminded others that dignity wasn't lost when the world turned its back. It was lost only when a man stopped believing he mattered. Meanwhile, the corrupt officer faced the consequences of his actions. He was suspended, then dismissed from the force. The public had made its judgment, but Cole didn't celebrate. "He learned his lesson," he said quietly. "Now it's his turn to rebuild." For Cole, justice wasn't about destruction. It was about correction. The world didn't need more hate. It needed reminders of humanity. And sometimes, that reminder came from the unlikeliest of places, a group of rough riders with weathered hands and stubborn hearts. As the weeks passed, the veteran's laughter returned. He spent his mornings working in the workshop beside the bikers, fixing engines and polishing chrome. Every rev of an engine was like a heartbeat, reminding him that the past didn't define him. The road ahead did. He was no longer the man under the broken lamppost. He was a brother, a fighter, a symbol of resilience. And as the flames of the campfire flickered in his eyes, he realized something profound. Sometimes the road to redemption doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with being seen. The days at the biker compound began to blend into something peaceful, something almost sacred. The veteran woke up early each morning, drawn by the smell of oil and dust, the sound of metal clanging against metal, and the steady hum of engines being tuned. The brothers worked in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that spoke of respect, of unspoken understanding. Each man there had seen his share of loss, betrayal, and pain. Yet together, they built something unbreakable, a place where scars didn't define you. They reminded you of what you survived. For the veteran, it was the first time in years that he felt purpose pulsing through his veins again. Cole often watched him from across the yard, seeing in him the same quiet strength that once lived inside himself. The veteran didn't talk much about the war, but when he did, every word carried weight. One night by the fire, he told them about his unit, the ones that never made it back. His voice cracked when he said their names, yet the flames reflected something fierce in his eyes. They didn't die for nothing, he said. They died so we could stand. No one spoke after that. Tank threw another log into the fire, and the crackling filled the silence. Sometimes, words weren't needed. In the following weeks, Cole introduced the veteran to the group's deeper purpose. They weren't just a motorcycle club. They were a lifeline. They rode to raise funds for wounded soldiers, repaired bikes for vets who couldn't afford the tools, and showed up at hospitals where forgotten heroes lay in silence. The veteran joined those rides, sitting tall on a rebuilt Harley they'd given him. The roar of the engine beneath him felt like a heartbeat returning to life. He didn't feel like a ghost anymore. He felt like a man with a mission again. But not everyone saw them as heroes. Some in the town whispered that the bikers were troublemakers, that what they did to the officer was vigilante justice. The media called them outlaws with morals, unsure whether to praise or condemn them. Cole didn't care. They can say what they want, he told his crew. We ride for the truth, not headlines. Yet, deep down, he knew public perception could change everything. The world often fears what it doesn't understand, and men who live by their own code rarely fit into society's neat little boxes. Still, every time the veteran rode beside them, Cole felt that what they were doing mattered. In a world drowning in noise and injustice, they were a reminder that courage still existed, raw, imperfect, and real. The veteran's story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to every man who had been silenced, shamed, or forgotten. And as they rode through the open highway, wind cutting through leather and memory, Cole couldn't help but think that maybe redemption didn't come from forgiveness. Maybe it came from fighting one more good fight. The city eventually quieted down, the storm of attention fading as new stories claimed the headlines. But something had changed. People began noticing the forgotten, the homeless veterans, the old men sitting alone at park benches, the women who carried folded flags instead of family. Compassion had been reignited, and it all began with one man under a broken streetlight. Cole and the crew continued their missions quietly, helping without cameras, riding without recognition. To them, the world didn't need more talk. It needed more action. One rainy afternoon, the veteran stood outside a local shelter where he now volunteered. He watched as a young soldier, barely 20 years old, stumbled through the door, drenched and exhausted. The boy's eyes were hollow, his uniform still crisp, but his spirit already fading. The veteran saw himself in that kid. The same hopeless stare, the same silent plea for someone to notice. Without hesitation, he walked up, placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder, and said, "You're safe here, son." Those words, once spoken to him, now passed on like a torch. The circle of redemption had quietly completed itself. That night, as thunder rolled through the sky, the veteran joined the bikers for one more ride. The streets glistened under the rain, reflecting the glow of their headlights like rivers of light. They rode in perfect formation, each engine roaring in unison, a symphony of defiance against the darkness. To onlookers, they might have looked like outlaws, but to those who understood, they were something else entirely. Protectors, carrying stories that deserved to be remembered. When they stopped at a bridge overlooking the city, Cole turned to the group. "This is why we ride," he said, voice steady against the wind. "Not for revenge, not for pride, but so no one ever has to kneel alone again." The veteran looked out over the skyline, tears mixing with the rain on his face. He realized that everything, the humiliation, the pain, the redemption, had led to this moment of peace. For the first time in decades, his heart was still. The engines started again, roaring into the night, fading into the distance like thunder retreating after a storm. Somewhere in the city below, another man in need would soon hear that sound, a reminder that there were still people who cared, still warriors who rode for those who couldn't stand. And as long as the road stretched ahead, their mission would never truly end. Weeks later, A letter arrived at the biker compound, creased, rain-stained, written in careful, trembling handwriting. It was from the former police officer. Cole stared at it for a long time before opening it, unsure what to expect. Inside, the words were raw, stripped of ego. The officer admitted his shame, confessed that the incident had broken him, but also saved him. He had joined a rehabilitation program, begun volunteering at a veteran support center, and now spent his weekends serving food to those he once ignored. At the end of the letter, he wrote one line that caught Cole off guard. "I finally understand what it means to kneel, with humility, not power." Cole folded the paper slowly, his jaw tight. Redemption had found its way even to the man who least deserved it. That night, the crew gathered in the garage. Cole read the letter aloud, his gravelly voice steady but heavy with emotion. Silence followed. Then Tank spoke softly. "Guess even the broken ones can be rebuilt." The others nodded. They'd seen too much of life to believe people were purely good or bad. The road had taught them that everyone carried ghosts, and sometimes the right moment of reckoning could bring a man back from his worst self. The letter wasn't forgiveness. It was proof that even the darkest nights could lead to dawn. The veteran listened quietly from his corner, his eyes glistening. "He's not the same man," he said, almost to himself, "and maybe that's enough." His voice carried no bitterness, no need for vengeance, just peace. For a long time, he thought strength meant never bending. But now, he understood that real strength came from choosing not to hate. Cole gave him a slow nod. "That's why you're one of us," he said. "You carry the weight and still stand tall." The men spent the rest of the evening in quiet reflection. The sound of rain against the roof mixed with the faint hum of an idling bike. No one needed to speak. The atmosphere said enough. For all their rough edges, tattoos, and leather, they were men with hearts that still remembered what honor meant. The world saw them as outlaws, but in truth, they were keepers of an ancient code, the kind that asked for no recognition, only purpose. When the rain finally stopped, Cole stepped outside. The night was cool and still, the streets washed clean. He lit a cigarette and looked at the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to break. He thought about how one small act, an apology, a rescue, a moment of courage, could ripple through the lives of so many. The city slept, unaware that redemption was alive and breathing in its quiet corners. Cole took one last drag, exhaled, and whispered to himself, "We ride again tomorrow." Morning sunlight filtered through the clouds, painting gold streaks over the compound. The veteran was already awake, tightening the bolts on his bike with slow, steady hands. His movements were deliberate, ritualistic almost, as if each turn of the wrench grounded him further into his new life. Tank approached with 2 cups of coffee, setting one beside him. "You sleep at all?" he asked. The veteran chuckled softly. "Didn't need to. Some nights you don't rest. You heal." Tank grinned. "You talk like Cole now. Guess he's rubbing off on me," the veteran replied, smiling faintly. Later that day, they prepared for another charity ride. This time, to raise funds for a veteran's home that was on the verge of closing. Dozens of bikers gathered from across the state, their engines creating a low, thunderous hum that shook the earth. People lined the streets, waving flags and clapping as they passed. Among them were children who saluted, old soldiers who stood at attention, and strangers whose eyes glistened with gratitude. The veteran rode near the front, his posture proud, his face calm. The world was no longer passing him by. He was part of it again. As the convoy reached the veteran's home, Cole dismounted first. The old building stood tired but still strong, much like the men it sheltered. They spent the afternoon repairing the fence, painting the walls, and setting up new beds. The veteran worked harder than anyone, sweat running down his weathered face as he lifted, hammered, and carried. When someone asked why he pushed himself so much, he simply said, "Because someone once fought for me. Now it's my turn." His words carried through the air like a quiet prayer. As dusk approached, the group gathered outside for a small ceremony. They raised an American flag over the home, the cloth snapping in the evening breeze. Cole handed the rope to the veteran, letting him tie the final knot. When the flag reached the top, everyone fell silent. The moment wasn't about politics or pride. It was about remembrance. Every thread of that flag carried the weight of lives given, promises broken, and faith restored. And as it waved against the orange sky, the veteran felt something stir deep within him. Peace, pure and complete. Afterward, they sat on the steps, watching the sunset fade into night. Cole turned to the veteran. "You ever think about what's next?" The old man smiled. "I don't have to," he said softly. "Every mile we ride, every man we help, that's what's next." Cole nodded. "Then I'll see you on the next road." The two men clasped hands, their grip strong and unwavering. In that moment, no words were needed. The bond between them was forged not in blood or battle, but in redemption found through compassion, courage, and the roar of a motorcycle cutting through the night. Autumn settled over the city like a quiet memory. The leaves along the highways turned gold and crimson, scattering behind the bikers' wheels as they rode through the open country. Each mile carried the weight of their past, but also the promise of something better ahead. The veteran, once a shadow under a broken streetlight, was now a beacon to others who had lost their way. His name began to spread among shelters and hospitals, not as a victim, but as a man who stood again. And though he never sought fame, his presence alone became a kind of hope for those who thought their stories were over. One evening, after a long ride through the back roads, the crew stopped by an old gas station diner. Inside, a young woman approached the veteran shyly. "You're the man from the video, aren't you?" she asked. "The one who forgave the cop." The veteran smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. "I didn't forgive him," he said. "I just stopped carrying hate." The girl nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. "My dad was in the army. He didn't make it. I think he'd be proud of you." The words hit harder than any applause could. The veteran simply placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Then live in a way he'd be proud of too." That moment lingered long after they left the diner. The road stretched ahead, illuminated by the soft glow of the setting sun, and Cole rode beside the veteran in silence. He glanced over and said, "You ever think maybe this wasn't an accident?" The veteran chuckled. "You think fate rides a Harley?" Cole laughed, shaking his head. "Maybe. Or maybe it just knows how to find men who still have fight left in them." The veteran nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "And maybe we were meant to remind the world that honor doesn't die. It just needs someone to wake it up." Later that night, they camped by the edge of a quiet lake. The air was cool, the stars endless above them. Tank pulled out his guitar, strumming a slow tune while the others passed around stories, laughter, and silence in equal measure. When it was the veteran's turn to speak, he looked into the fire and said, "You know, I used to think the war took everything from me. But it didn't. It just made me forget what I still had. I still had brothers. I still had purpose. I just needed a reason to remember." No one spoke after that, because some truths don't need answers. They just need to be heard. The flames danced in their eyes, and for the first time in years, the veteran didn't see ghosts, he saw life. The laughter, the brotherhood, the simple act of sitting under the stars with men who understood, it was healing in its purest form. And as he leaned back, feeling the crackle of the fire and the hum of the night, he realized that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a road, one you kept riding, no matter how many miles it took to get there. Winter arrived, painting the landscape in frost and silence. The rides became fewer, the air colder, but the brotherhood never wavered. The veteran spent his mornings at the shelter, his afternoons in the workshop, and his evenings sharing coffee with the men who'd become his family. Each day was simple, yet sacred. He no longer counted the years he'd lost, only the ones he was reclaiming. Sometimes he'd walk past the old lamppost where it all began. The light had been fixed, shining steady now, casting no more shadows. He'd smile quietly, as if thanking the darkness for leading him to the light. Cole watched him grow stronger, prouder. The old soldier who once shivered in shame, now carried himself like a man reborn. "You ever think about writing your story down?" Cole asked one night. The veteran shook his head. "No need," he said. "The road tells it better than I ever could." And it was true. Every mile, every ride, every act of kindness was another chapter, written not in ink, but in motion, carved into the asphalt of redemption. The brotherhood had changed too. They rode not just for justice, but for memory, for every man and woman the world forgot. Their name began to carry weight, whispered with a strange mix of fear and reverence. People didn't just see bikers anymore. They saw protectors, men who stood where others turned away. They didn't need medals or titles. The rumble of their engines was enough to say, "We're here, and we still believe." On the anniversary of that fateful night, they gathered once more at the spot where everything began. The lamppost flickered gently above them, its light soft against the cold. The veteran stood there, his breath visible in the winter air. Cole placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You ready?" The veteran smiled, eyes shining. "Yeah, let's ride." Engines came alive, the night trembling under their roar. As they pulled away, the light from the lamppost reflected off their chrome, scattering into the darkness like sparks of hope. The city faded behind them, replaced by the endless stretch of highway and the rising dawn ahead. The veteran glanced at the horizon, gold, vast, and open, and felt something stir deep inside. This was no longer a story about a corrupt cop or a broken soldier. It was a story about rebirth, about men who refused to let the world forget what honor truly meant. And as they rode into the light, the veteran whispered into the wind, "For those who can't ride anymore, we'll carry you." The engines answered with thunder, and the road, once again, remembered their names. The road stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the soft light of dawn, a quiet symbol of everything they had fought to reclaim. The veteran, once a man crushed by silence and shame, now rode with his head held high, surrounded by brothers who had taught him that redemption was not about erasing the past, but about transforming it. Every mile was a victory, not over others, but over the parts of himself that once believed he was forgotten. The engines roared not with anger, but with purpose. It was the sound of life returning to those who had nearly lost it, and that sound would echo long after the ride was over. Cole looked over at the veteran, pride glimmering in his eyes. "Funny thing about the road," he said over the rumble of the engines. "It never judges where you've been. It only cares if you keep going." The veteran smiled, the wind carrying away his laughter. In that moment, he understood something profound. The road was not just freedom, it was forgiveness in motion. Every turn, every gust of wind, every sunrise was proof that no one is too far gone to start again. The man who once slept beneath a broken light now led others toward hope, his story no longer one of defeat, but of strength reborn through compassion. As they approached the outskirts of the city, people stopped to watch, some in awe, some in tears. The legend of that night, when bikers made a corrupt man kneel before the truth, had become more than a viral story. It was a mirror held to society, forcing everyone to ask themselves what justice truly means. Was it punishment or redemption? Cole and his brothers had found their answer, not in revenge, but in restoring what cruelty had taken, dignity. And perhaps that was the greatest form of justice there was, to remind the world that every human being, no matter how fallen, deserves the chance to rise again. When they finally stopped, the veteran removed his helmet and gazed at the horizon. The sun was higher now, painting the road in gold. He turned to Cole and whispered, "You gave me back my life." Cole shook his head. "No," he said softly. "You just needed someone to remind you it was still yours." The words lingered, carried by the wind, as the engines quieted one by one. The world felt still, as if pausing to honor the truth that had unfolded, not just for a single man, but for anyone who had ever been broken, silenced, or unseen. And as the screen begins to fade, a single thought remains. Strength is not born in the absence of pain, but in the courage to stand after it. The veteran's journey is a reminder that one act of compassion can rewrite 1,000 wrongs, and that sometimes the loudest kind of justice is found in silence, in action, in heart. So if this story moved you, let it live beyond the screen. Share it, speak it, and carry its message forward. Subscribe to join this journey. Leave your thoughts below. And remember, heroes don't always wear medals. Sometimes they just ride.